Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We've got Josh Taylor back on. It's been a minute since we had Josh on, but with the big news, I want to talk to a big name personality here in the Pittsburgh area. That's Josh Taylor. We're going to talk about the George Pickens trade a little bit more. We did our emergency episode, but now it's time to dive full in. What is this truly about? What is truly the plan? Who are other options the Steelers could add at wide receiver if they want to add anybody? All that here and more on a full episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. More on them later. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself. It's Josh Taylor. He's back on the show. You know him at KDKA TV. We used to have him on all the time. This man's a double dad though now, and he's working the desk at KDKA. He's always breaking the big news and stuff there. So we had to let him get his thing. But when there's big news afoot, I gotta get my man Josh. Josh, welcome back to Locked On Steelers.
It's good to be back, man. First of all, a little warning to everyone who might be watching on YouTube. If you see me and Chris looking side to side, we're probably just waiting for something to happen.
Yep.
Because anytime, well, not anytime, but quite often, when I'm on with Chris, something goes down, and we need to either have to scrap stuff or do an emergency show because some news happens with this team, and it's like, seriously, again? So yep. I fully imagine at some point either Chris's phone will go off or mine will go off with an alert with maybe a name Rogers attached or Cooper. Or
don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
I'm sorry. I don't want to do that to you, but I'm fully expecting it at this point. I'm sorry. But all that said, it has been a while. It's good to get the cleats out the closet and dust off the pads. And it's kind of weird, man. It's been almost 10 months since I made the jump from sports to news and pretty much sports TV, sports radio, quit at cold turkey and went over to the TV side. So it's been, or I should say the news side of TV. So it's been fun to kind of watch it from the outside perspective. I get to watch my friends go to work now as opposed to being at work with them. So I'm still watching the show. I'm still listening. I heard your episode with Shaq. Shout out to Dave Damashek. So I get to enjoy it a little bit more now, just from the outside side of it. But there's the workload doesn't really change. It's still left.
Absolutely. We got to jump into this George Pickens stuff because this is crazy. So I did my emergency episode. You got my immediate reaction. I am not on board with this right away. I have to say, Josh, and I know there's some people out there that are very much on, like, him being a malcontent. They don't like that. This is a move to clean up the locker room. And to me, that is the biggest thing the Steelers have to be doing here. Like, if this is about this, and if this is about the locker room, if it's about George Pickens and about his maturity, then I can understand that. I was just of the mindset that because they moved off of trading him before the draft and during the draft, that they had worked it out, that it was going to be fine. They were going to keep him around. But now that they've moved him and they move him for a third round pick, which isn't terrible compensation. That's, I thought they should try to get him for a second, but they're getting him for a third next year. They now have 12 picks overall next year, including 3 third round picks with the comp pick, the Cowboys pick and their own pick. That's a lot of capital to be starting to amass so that you can build up to a big trade to move up and get your quarterback for the future. But looking at this, I think one of the big quotes that came out from yesterday about this, when all the news broke, Ryan Clark was on ESPN, and Ryan Clark has had Mike Tomlin on his show, and one on his show, The Pivot. And one of the things Mike Tomlin said is like he runs to the idea of coaching up players that need coaching. And so Ryan Clark said this, quote, Mike Tomlin consistently says he doesn't run from coaching. If George Pickens, with that immense amount of talent, can no longer exist in that locker room, it's going to be difficult for him to exist anywhere. And Josh, it made me harken back to all of the trades, like the major wide receiver trades of the Tomlin era. All the way back to 2010, they traded away Holmes for a 5th. Now, Holmes ended up playing well for the Jets. He almost beat the Steelers in the AFC Championship game. He did beat the Patriots in the week before that. but the Steelers ultimately used that capital to help them double down and get Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. Safe to say they did all right there. When they traded away Martavis Bryant in 2018, they got a third-round pick for a guy that never even played for the Raiders. And again, Martavis Bryant himself was a fourth-round pick. When they traded away Antonio Brown for a third and a fifth-round pick in 2019, he didn't even play for the Raiders. He was barely there before he was like screaming, I want to be free. And he
never actually jumping into his pool than he did on the field with the Raiders.
Exactly. And then 4 years after that, they trade away Chase Claypool in the 2023 in the middle of the season. They trade him away for the first pick of the second round. And then Chase Claypool goes on and barely ever plays for the Bears. He's on his third team or something. Then last year, they trade Deontay Johnson away for Dante Jackson and a pick swap. Now, granted, that pick definitely has that swap, that trade there, the least amount of the capital, because Dante Jackson was clearly a rental cornerback, but his rental cornerback went so much better than what the Panthers got with Deontay Johnson, who's now on his third team since that trade. So if you're looking,
and it's third in the division.
And third in the AFC North. That's so
his third team in the AFC North.
But my point here, Josh, is that the Steelers, if you look at all those times, they have pretty much nailed it when it comes to the jump off point of these talented receivers that they bring into the organization. They're like, all right, we're done. And they quickly fall off. The one guy, Antonio Brown, you can at least say won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers before he literally threw off his jersey and chucked up the deuces in the middle of a game the next year. But they've been right about that. Do you think they are right about doing this about George Pickens right now, or is this a mistake?
The only thing that I think they didn't get right with this was the timing. It's the only thing I don't like. I don't like the timing. Doing it in early May as opposed to maybe mid to late April, that might have been the perfect time to do it. I mean, granted, if you can't do it at the end of the season or the beginning of the league year, if you could do it leading up to or even during the draft, you probably feel better about it. I think everybody probably feels better about it because it says two things. One, you definitively know that, okay, they're moving on from this and you probably understand why. But it also gives them a chance to definitively move from it and find a way to actually move forward and maybe prepare for it and, have some kind of provision for it. And that didn't happen.
Right.
So it leads me to believe two things. And I think you hit on one already during your emergency podcast. I think one is that they realized that this was not going to work, even in this last year, even if they wanted to keep another year for him, get a compensatory pick, maybe let him hit the market. I'm with you on this. I don't think they thought, you know what? We've already dealt with enough drama in the past couple of years. We know it's probably going to be some bumps in the road this year, and we know how he's probably going to respond to it. I get that feeling. The second thing for me is, and this is another thing you hit on, it's like they know when the problem is no longer worth it. They know when the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. And we'll go back to the old adage, better get rid of a player a year too early than a year too late.
It's a very good point.
This is what they're doing. And you brought up Antonio Brown, and you brought up Antonio Brown. There was another one. Deontay Johnson. They extended both of those guys before they traded.
It's a good point.
But Chase Claypool didn't get an extension, got traded. Now you got George Pickens, didn't get an extension and got traded. So that says a lot. When before you get to the extension, they decide to move on from you. That means, and if nothing else, Chris, that tells us they're getting a better chance of reading that radar earlier and earlier in the process. Because Antonio Brown, he had been here a while. Deontay Johnson had been here a while. It seems like now that radar is a little bit more keen to, hey, let's nip this in the bud now and move on from this now before it gets too late.
Yeah, I think that's what this was. I think that this was the Steelers saying, you know what, we're moving on from it. And again, I still felt like there was something that he had there. And maybe that's just me being the ever optimist about the maturity of young men in football and thinking that, man, he'll grow up when he sees the dollar signs in front of him. But I mean, let's face it. We had Mike DeFabo on right on here. Mike DeFabo was the person who broke the news that George Pickens was late to the Christmas Day game. There were multiple rumors about how George Pickens wasn't giving enough in practice, wasn't focusing enough, and those types of things. And you need that from your guys, especially with the locker room that they're trying to build right now, with the nucleus they're trying to form for the future. You look at the O-line, you look at the investments that they're making across the board. They're trying to build a new young nucleus, a new young core, and they need that young core to be focused on winning and on being team first. And, George, I'm not going to say he wasn't about winning, but you often saw times when he wasn't doing the most team first thing, the time when he didn't block for Jaylen Warren out in space, the times that he got into scraps or he got penalties that hurt the team, things like that. Those are things you can't have. And I think that if he had shored those things up, he'd still be a Pittsburgh Steeler right now. They would have found a way. They might not have traded for DK Metcalf if they felt that he was the guy. But clearly that move was to get a guy in the locker room, and DK Metcalf, who can handle being a number one, DK Metcalf, he gets into scraps now and then with people. He's a physical guy, but he doesn't have all the extra things that George Pickens has brought with him, and that might be the issue there. I want to talk more about this with Josh and how the Steelers build off of this moving forward. Are there receivers they can go get? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Josh Taylor, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge, and it's electric in the arena. With Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why everyone should use Game Time. The all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue, and it's so reassuring. The best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference of those prices. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms can supply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Josh Taylor. I continue. We could kick around the idea that George was being let go because of his locker room contributions or his lack of focus at times. But let's look forward a little bit here. If you're the Steelers and now you've given away your 1-2 punch at wide receiver that it looked like they might have as a dangerous duo going into 2026, how do you address this? Do you stay pat and you trust that Calvin Austin, Robert Woods, and Roman Wilson, one of those guys, emerge as a solid number 2? Or do you go get a guy? Because there are options out there. Amari Cooper is still available. Allen Lazard is reportedly available for a trade, and we all know that Aaron Rodgers loves him some Allen Lazard. But there's also a big thing that happened on Wednesday in the Jaguars cutting Gabe Davis, a guy who's been a good number 2 wide receiver for the Bills. He was a tough player for them. He dealt with injuries this past year, but now he's out there, and it makes you wonder what's the plan here to go with that. Should they go get another big name wide receiver who wouldn't be or not a big name wide receiver, but another name at wide receiver who can fit a specific role and be a better number 2 option or more proven number 2 option than the guys they are currently hoping can upgrade into that on their roster?
I think it makes sense for them because it's not like whoever they bring in is probably going to break the bank, right? They're not bringing in guys that are going to cost, 8 figures as far as maybe a 1-year deal. So There's that part of it. But plus, the Steelers have the cap space for it. So it's not like they don't have, not like they're reaching under their couch trying to find an extra $600,000 laying around. They have enough cap space where they can make a move like this happen, probably not hesitate to do it. So I think it makes sense. Gabe Davis is a name that intrigues me, if for no other reason. He's a guy who's been known to make plays on third downs. You need third down. You need possession down, as Mike Tomlin calls them, possession down playmakers on this team. If you can find one of those guys in Gabe Davis, you feel better about it. If you find a guy in Amari Cooper that can make plays and move the chains for you, you feel better about it. So that feels like the no-brainer aspect of it all. But I will say this: you brought up Allen Lazard. If they make a move for Allen Lazard, and I don't want to make light of this particular idiom because of current world events going on the other side of the world, but you're probably going to see certain color smoke go up.
No, yeah.
Allen Lazard has worked in a deal. That smoke's going to be in the air, and that means who's probably coming next.
Yeah,
because you're probably
it means Aaron Rodgers is coming to town.
Yeah, you're not going to make the move for A in Allen Lazard if you're not expecting B in Aaron Rodgers. So there's kind of an indicator there you can keep your eye on as far as that's concerned. But as far as bringing in an outside guy, someone that can, especially someone that can complement a receiver like DK Metcalf, it feels like a no-brainer.
It does feel like a no-brainer to try to add someone, because again, you're also talking about low risk, low cost here,
exactly.
Because you're getting you can get 1 year rentals on some of these guys and say, hey, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, great. We didn't spend a whole lot on you. And that's where I think the Steelers could be looking at right now, because to me, the Steelers still could use another threatening presence in their passing game. They have DK Metcalf. They have Pat Freiermuth. We know that Calvin Austin can be a good deep threat with his speed and can be quick in space. We do not know about Roman Wilson. Now, Jeremy Fowler of ESPN came out and said that part of the calculations that he's heard is that the Steelers see that Roman Wilson could take a year 2 jump. Now, the year 2 jump would have to be like what do you call a bigger jump, a high jump of some sort, because Roman Wilson never saw the field. He was injured. He never got to play. And there were questions about his ability to play when practices started. So Roman Wilson being a big step up would be huge and would change, I think, a lot of people's trajectory about this situation. But as it stands right now, the Steelers are back to square one, where they have one guy who's a bona fide wide receiver 1 type. He's big, he's fast, he can get the job done. And then they have a bunch of other guys that are fighting over wide receiver 2, and it's not always consistent who is that wide receiver 2. And that's where I think the problems are coming for the Steelers right now, if they're not moving to get somebody. But again, you can go get somebody. You look at their cap space right now, Josh. They have $31.6 million. We know they like to keep about. It's plenty of space to make a move. You know that they like to keep about $10 million, in emergency funds for if they need to sign somebody or trade for someone in the offseason. So that gives you, if Aaron Rodgers is to be believed and he's signing for $10 million or whatever, like he brought up, on his own volition on Pat McAfee, that gives you another $10 million to say, hey, you know what? We're going to pay a 1 year rental on a receiver and we'll see how this goes. That to me does make sense if the Steelers can operate that way. I just don't know that they will.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they operate with this, because it feels like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like we were exact same place we were a year ago, except wide receiver 1 isn't George Pickens, is DK Metcalf. So you pretty much just swapped out one for the other. Outside of that, the wide receiver room looks largely the same, and except for adding Robert Woods, really. And so maybe you swap out one of the lower end guys and bring in Robert Woods. Not that that's a bad move or anything, because I think he can be useful too, especially as a blocker. But I think he has a role that's specifically carved out for him. But other than that, you're looking at basically the same room. You're looking at the same competition for the same dudes trying to be the number 2 again. I've heard a lot of people with their expectations and stuff for Roman Wilson. And I'm like, look, get him on the field in a uniform first.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do that first. And then set your expectations from there. Like, let's make sure we get him out on the field and seeing him run routes first in a uniform game action. And then we can start seeing what we can expect from Roman Wilson. And that's nothing against him and the work that he's put in to get to this point. I'm not trying to harp on the young man, but it's just you can't set expectations so high for something you haven't seen yet. So there's so much out there lying around that makes us wonder, well, where's it going to come from? We know what the tight end situation is. We even know what the running back situation is. I think bringing in Kenneth Gainwell maybe eases out a little bit as far as a guy who can help you in the passing game on 3rd down specifically.
Maybe.
But you got to do what you got to do on 1st and 2nd down before you can even worry about 3rd down. So that's where I think we're kind of stuck with that whole, okay, here we go again. I think that's how some people feel like they're on that same carousel. It's understandable.
Yeah, I think it is understandable. This is there's a lot. I mean, especially when this is an earth-shattering move by the Steelers, in my opinion. A lot of the things that, like, 'cause again, I said on the show, once they go after the draft, I'm like, okay, so they're not trading George Pickens, so they believe in keeping him. But maybe that was the illusion that they needed to get the Cowboys to say, all right, we'll give up a 3rd. Finally, you can take our 3rd round pick here, and that's what the Steelers got to be able to do. Maybe that was part of the plan, was to wait and make them more impatient. And if that was the case, they got that. Now, will this pay off? Who knows? Like we said, the Cowboys salary cap space, they don't look like they can pay a wide receiver, in the next
year. Anybody.
Right. Or anybody. But like, you look at their salary cap this year, it's fine. They have $34.5 million, but next year they have $10.4 million in cap space right now. Now you can make that up with some other things, but Dak Prescott is a $74 million cap hit. CeeDee Lamb's a $38 million cap hit. Double O is a $20.7 million cap hit. Tyler Smith is a $21.2 million cap hit. That's a lot of money that you're investing in those positions. And then if you're throwing in
for quarterback and receiver, wow.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is that you look at that and then you throw George Pickens into the mix with that. Where does he fall? Like, how does he get paid, and who gets sacrificed because George Pickens is getting paid by the Cowboys? I think that there's not so easy questions there as well.
There's plenty for them to think about, especially considering the fact that this is another thing that we really don't know, and we don't really know what George Pickens' camp was telling the Steelers about possibly long-term. We don't know if there were discussions. We don't know if there's any ultimatums issued. So we also don't know what conversations might happen with the Cowboys when he gets to Dallas. Like, this is right. There's so many moving parts to just George Pickens' end of this alone, regardless of who he plays for. Because all you got to do is turn on George Pickens' highlight tape, and everybody's going to be like, I want to pay max money for that. We know that. But the circumstances of him leaving Pittsburgh now kind of change that a bit. And the dynamics of how you're going to pay him, like you said, in relation to other people. Is there someone you have to maybe move on from? Is there someone you maybe have to restructure just to be able to afford him? And we know Jerry Jones's gymnastics with the salary cap over the years has always been something crazy. It's always a kaleidoscope more than it is a periscope. So all of that comes together, and you're sorting out, okay, well, if you're the Cowboys, does this really work for them? Or is it just maybe that one-year rental that they're looking for to be able to move forward and do something else? There's a lot of questions still remaining in Dallas for him, for sure.
Certainly. There's a lot of questions remaining in Dallas and a lot of questions remaining in Pittsburgh. We'll get to more of those questions next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Josh Taylor, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork connects you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork gets to help affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with the top talent and grow your business today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Josh Taylor of KDKA TV. Josh, let's look at how the Steelers are set up right now for their plan moving forward. Now, a lot of people have asked me. We talked about, like, if they sign Allen Lazard, it all but confirms that Aaron Rodgers is on the way. I had some people say, well, if they're trading away George, is this a fire sale? They're going to start trading away everyone. I do not think it goes there. Like, someone asked me and Alan Saunders if the Steelers are now going to trade TJ Watt. I think this further confirms they're not going to, because, again, it's not like they got rid of TJ or Minka or Cam. It's not like they gutted the team of a captain. They gutted the team of a guy who's very talented and also, again, never had the top tier production that you were hoping for, and also had other issues going on for him. And so that's the guy that they moved on from. But to me, that just means they did not see George Pickens as part of the core of the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they said, we need to get as much value out of him as we can to continue building that core. And that, to me, is, I think, the biggest message that's been sent by all of this.
There's another message that was sent too, and it had nothing to do with George Pickens. It had nothing to do with anybody on defense. I think there was another message sent when Najee Harris wasn't retained.
Yeah.
And this is a guy in the whole series with Hard Knocks in the AFC North, it chronicles it. When they had people in those leadership positions with the meetings, Najee Harris was in those meetings. Him, Russell Wilson, he was in those meetings. He was considered one of the leaders on the team. Pat Freiermuth, he was considered one of the leaders of the offense. They were in those meetings. And they were one of those guys that we had heard so much, and you and I reported it, that he was a guy that they were pretty much wanting to move into, pretty much preparing him for that leadership role. And they moved on from him. So it maybe it's not that surprising that you're moving on from a guy like George Pickens, who pretty much, I think they knew, probably couldn't trust in a leadership role. and knew probably couldn't be the citizen they wanted, which is probably why they brought a DK Metcalf in. And you mentioned, DK Metcalf is physical. He can get into some scraps, but off the field, he is a model citizen. He does a lot of stuff in the community. He's a guy that represents a lot of what this organization stands for.
He's getting married to Namrani.
See? There's a bunch to it. So there's a ton of different theories you can throw out to what their plan is. For me, it's really simple. It feels like they're getting back to what this organization used to be. You and I always talk a lot. You know I'm one of the presidents of the Cam Hayward fan club. But one of the things I always say about Cam Hayward is an old school Steeler.
Yes, he is.
He did it the way those guys that were the vets, the Ike Taylors and the James Harrisons, when he came in, they pretty much told him, this is what we do. This is how this goes. So he was pretty much that only link remaining to that old school era. So now you want to try to reset the board and shuffle the deck and bring in more guys that have that mentality. TJ Watt has that old school mentality. Minka Fitzpatrick has that mentality. But then you see guys like a Jack Sawyer, guys like a Will Howard. You see Derek Harmon. Like, these are guys that fit that old mantra of wanting to represent what this organization used to be, not only on the field, but how you carry yourself off the field, how you approach your work, how you approach being coached. Because once again, I'm going to go back to Hard Knocks in the AFC North. We saw some of the stuff that Mike Tomlin would say to different people to motivate guys. You saw what he did with Nick Herbig. You saw what he even did with George Pickens and with Najee Harris. You need guys that respond well to that kind of coaching, to where, all right, it's more or less to build you up because, hey, we need you. We're counting on you. So responsibility is going to lie on you. And they're bringing in clearly guys that have the character, not only the athletic talent, but the character to be able to carry that mantle and say, you know what, I'm going to take this on me. I'm going to do what I need to do in order to be in that position to succeed. And I think that's what
I agree with that.
As far as within the locker room.
I agree with that. I think that they're trying to reshape that. I think they've taken their swings and look, every team has goofballs on it. Like say Antonio Holmes, when they traded him away, he was one of those guys. Like he was late. He got caught doing other things. Everybody has to. You look at AJ Brown and him reading books on the sideline when he's supposed to. Like there's every team got to be, even Super Bowl champions. But the thing is that you got to find a way to get people focused. And if you can't, and if one of the better players, and let's face it, George Pickens was one of the best players in the offense last year. And if one of the best players in the offense is dogging it in practice and isn't giving his all, what tone is that set for everyone that's coming behind him? And I think that might be the thing here, is that they know that DK Metcalf will set the tone, and he's going to be that guy, that leader, whereas George wasn't. And so they said, hey, we're going to give this guy some money. We're going to figure it out, and then we're going to see what we can get back.
Absolutely. And for me personally, I think it goes a lot further, especially when you talk about this coaching staff and the guys who are on this coaching staff, especially the guy who's coaching the team. It all speaks back to what these guys expect of these players when they come in. And especially these younger guys coming in, they're coming in being told, hey, this is the expectation. So when you have older, hate to say veteran guys who aren't meeting that standard, who aren't setting that expectation, living up to the expectation, it's going to trickle down. And I know a lot of people try to like connect all the dots with the wide receiver position. The crazy part about it is I think a lot of it's just isolated incidents, but there are dots you can connect just the wide receiver position of different issues that they've had. Not that I'm saying that this will rub off on the current guys, but you do not want to have all those issues in the same locker room all at the same time, especially when you see a head coach who's made a lot work over a different time. I mean, a decade ago, he had a lot of different personality in that locker room. He had a lot of guys who probably did not get along, a bunch of guys that clashed and had their own individual issues. And somehow, some way, they were able to make it work. But if you can avoid it, it's a lot easier if you can avoid it and everyone's on the same page, because we love to make parallels to, units and championship teams of times past. The one thing we can always say about those previous units, those previous teams, more often than not, those guys were on the same page. More often than not, those guys pulled the same rope. I know a lot of people probably still have that picture of the 05 team all kneeling in prayer before a game, and probably in their living rooms or in their basements. But the one thing you can never question was how much those guys were on the same page. You can never question the 08 team or the 10 team that went to the Super Bowl and lost. You can never question whether or not those guys were on the same page, because everybody knew what their job was. I can hear Ike Taylor in my mind right now. We knew if we messed up on defense, we were going to hear about it when we got back to the sideline. I've heard Ike Taylor say that when I worked with him. I've heard Chris Hoke say it when I worked with him. And these are two different media and two different players that I worked with that said the same thing. So that resonates with that group. So you want to bring in another group of guys that understand that message. So you have a Cam Hayward that can bring that message forward. Now the offense is going to be a little bit different because they skew younger. But if you have one or two guys in the front of the room that can really get that message out, the head coach's stamp is on it, it says a lot more.
I think it does. My last question to you here, Josh, and then I'll answer it myself. Does this move, because some people are putting this out there, does this move to you mean that the Steelers are tanking on the 2025 season?
No, because it's not in their nature. If they were going to tank, they could have tanked in 2019. If they were going to tank, they could have tanked in 2022. I don't see it. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's just not how they're wired as an organization. I think, and that might frustrate some people because they're thinking, oh, we need to just have a losing season and get a top pick. Well, they may not have to do that now because they got some trade capital where they can still move up and find themselves in position to draft the quarterback they want, should that be the route that they go. So if we've known anything, Chris, if we've known anything during our time covering this team, if we've known anything from Mike Tomlin's tenure as head coach, if we've known anything from the Steeler organization over history, we know that they do not tank. They compete as often as they can. And to borrow the Tomlins, they're going to ride it till the wheels fall off. So I don't see it that way.
No, I'm right with you. I don't think this means the Steelers are tanking at all. I think, if anything, if you're the Steelers, it just means, hey, we believe we're going to be more competitive. We're adding by subtracting, and they're also investing in that next draft class. So again, 12 picks, three third rounders, 2 fourth rounders, 2 fifth rounders. All that adds up to being like, hey, they're going to have the ammunition. But also, like you said, if they were going to tank, they would have done so in 2019 when Ben's elbow fell off, and they could have gotten a super high pick.
They traded for Minka instead.
Exactly. They traded for Minka Fitzpatrick, and that was a big move at the time. And who knows? Because there's some people out there that says, imagine if they lose every game that year, Joe Burrow's their quarterback. And I hear that, but that's just not who they are. They're not going to give up. They wanted to give Ben Roethlisberger another crack at it. They thought he could recover. He came back for a couple years, and it didn't work out. But if they didn't do it then, and they didn't do it when TJ Watt missed half the season and they were 2-6 at the midway point, why would they do it now when they still have a competitive top 10 defense, when they have a young offensive line they're putting together, when they think they've been putting the pieces together to be a better run football team? They just traded for DK Metcalf. Right. I don't think that this is the roster that everyone thinks it is, that is just going to tank. Now, this may be Mike Tomlin's first ever losing season by just happenstance of there's a lot of moving pieces here. That might happen. But I do not foresee this being a situation where you see the Steelers naturally fall into a top 10 pick and it looking like this team gave up in the middle of the season.
I don't see that either. And there have been times in the past, like you laid a lot of them out there where they could have just simply just thrown in the towel, because we've seen other teams do that in the past.
Yep.
They're just not built this way. And I will say this, because I had this conversation with somebody else off air, and I was telling them, I said, look, remember to the teams past, because I mentioned the parallels to championship teams before. Remember those teams of the past, they had the same things. Like, we could talk about who the quarterback was and who the coach was, but you know what else they had? They had an infrastructure. Right. Infrastructure in place. You knew who was up front on the offensive line. You knew who was up front on the defensive line. And usually, in most of those cases, you either had a Hall of Famer or two or an All-Pro or two in each unit. That's kind of how that worked. So you knew where the infrastructure was. And then, now granted, in the case of the 70s dynasty, the quarterback came first and the infrastructure was built around him. Right. But the 2-aughts group, the infrastructure was in place first, and then the quarterback came and a couple other things got sprinkled in, and you had a really great mix of a team. Sometimes the order doesn't matter, but do you have the infrastructure in place so that everybody there collectively is able to work at that level and be able to raise to that certain level to meet that standard that we always talk about, a lot of people so flippantly? But there has to be an infrastructure in place, because in this franchise's history, if it's not in place, it doesn't work.
Right. And I don't think the Steelers are forfeiting their infrastructure that they already have in place right now. Again, that's not who they are. That's why they've stayed there. And if anything, heck, when Bill Cowher was struggling, they didn't tell him to tank. They said, hey, keep building, get back to being a playoff team. And when he did, they were a force, and that helped set up the core that eventually they drafted Ben Roethlisberger into, and the rest was history. It's why I don't think they're tanking. But hey, we'll talk about that more with Jenna Harner on tomorrow's episode here. Josh, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Social media, most outlets, Josh Taylor HD. Pretty simple place to find me. On the TV side, KDKA TV, most days, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, maybe 7:30, and maybe 11 o'clock on the KDKA Plus side, probably either at 7:30 or 10. I might be in the field. I might be at the news desk. I might be all over the place. You never really know. So that's the fun part of it. I got to say one more thing before I go because I haven't been able to do this publicly. This guy right here. Seriously, I'm super proud of this man. Everything he's done with the Locked On Steelers podcast, getting the beat job with the Post-Gazette. This man has continued to bring you content every day, written, online, podcast form, YouTube. Continues to do the work, and he's making a name for himself, not only in Pittsburgh, but in the industry as a whole. Super proud of him, and he's a PPS alum, so you know he's putting the work in. Proud of you, man. Seriously, I had to say that because it's been too long. So I had to do
City League.
City League all day.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you. We got to get out of here. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on social media, TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, all the places, Twitter as well, at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with Jenna Harner right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.